A billionaire in a wheelchair pushed everyone away, until one nurse refused to leave. A very powerful love story. Don't miss the chapter 9. My incredible and loyal family, your love and support mean the world to me. If this story touched your heart, don't just watch and leave. Please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, and share the biggest lesson you learned. Your support helps this channel grow more than you know. If you ever see anyone stealing or reposting my content, report them immediately. Don't let thieves profit from our hard work. Subscribe to this official channel and turn on the notification bell to stay safe from fake channels and scammers. Thank you for always standing with me. May God bless each and every one of you. The first thing Emory Rutledge ever said to Dahlia Reece was a number. 20,000, he said. Cash. It's in the envelope on the table by the window. Take it, tell the agency whatever story you like, and be off my property before the sun goes down. He didn't look at her when he said it. He sat in his wheelchair at the far end of a long room with a wall of glass, and beyond the glass lay the frozen white plate of Lake Minnetonka, scattered with ice houses like dice somebody had thrown and forgotten. The morning light came off the lake and filled the room, and it did him no favors. He was 46 and handsome in the ruined way of a man who had stopped bothering, grey stubble gone past deliberate, a sweater that cost more than her car worn like a punishment. Dahlia set her bag down slowly, the way she'd been taught to move in rooms where somebody's blood pressure was already a question. "Good morning to you too," she said. "It isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy. The agency sends you people, I pay you people to leave. Everyone's time is respected. You're the 10th. The record is 4 days. A young man from Eden Prairie lasted 4 hours, but he cried in the driveway, so I don't count him. You keep count. I keep everything." He turned the chair a few degrees, enough to face her, and she got the full weight of his eyes for the first time. Pale, intelligent, and cold, the way the lake was cold, which is to say all the way down. "You drove out from Brooklyn Park. 40 minutes longer with the ice on 694. That envelope is 5 months of your salary for turning around. Most people thank me." "I'm not most people, Mr. Rutledge." "Everyone says that," he said, "right up until they name their price." Dahlia had read the file twice, once at the kitchen table while Zeke pretended to do homework and actually watched highlights on his phone, and once in her car outside the gate, engine running for the heat. Emory Rutledge, T4 spinal cord injury, complete below the level of the lesion, 14 months post, history of autonomic dysreflexia, history of pressure injury, resolved, history of refusing care, unresolved. The words the last nurse had used in her exit notes were hostile and non-compliant, which in Dahlia's experience was chart language for a person still deciding whether to be alive. What the file didn't say, but everyone in Minnesota knew, was the other thing, Rutledge Medical, up in Fridley. Spinal fixation systems, surgical navigation, the hardware screwed into thousands of backbones from here to Singapore. A man who built a fortune holding other people's spines together, and then one night on Highway 12, the ice took his own, and there was no device in his company's whole gleaming catalogue that could give it back. She didn't pity him. Pity was useless in this work, and anyway, he'd have smelled it on her like smoke. "I'll make my rounds now," she said. "Med review first. Then I'd like to look at your skin." "You'd like to look at my skin?" He laughed, one dry note with nothing in it. "There are men who paid for dinner first." "Pressure check, Mr. Rutledge. You sat through the last nurse and the one before that without one, according to the notes, and a sore doesn't care how rich you are. Neither does sepsis. The envelope is on the table. So is the light," she said. "It's a nice table." Something moved through his face then, fast, there and gone, and she would spend a long time afterward trying to name it. Not amusement. Surprise, maybe, that the shape of the conversation had changed without his permission. He was a man accustomed to buying the ending of things. "1 week," he said, wheeling toward the hallway. "You'll take it inside a week. They always do. The only thing I've learned in this chair that's worth knowing is that everybody has an amount, Ms. Reece, everybody. The saints just cost more. The house swallowed him. It was built for swallowing. All stone and glass on the North Shore in Orono, 11,000 square feet arranged around a man who now lived in perhaps 4 rooms of it. Going through it that first day, she kept finding the archaeology of the life before. A rowing machine facing the lake, furred with dust, ski boots in a mudroom closet, and beside them, a woman's parka, sage green, expensive, hanging there like a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. In the study, framed on the wall, a photograph of 2 brothers on a dock, 20 years younger, arms around each other's necks, laughing at something outside the frame. He ignored her for most of the afternoon, which she'd expected. She did the work anyway, counted the medications, and found the count wrong. 3 days of the blood pressure tablets untouched, and said nothing yet, just wrote it down. Checked the supply room and found it stocked like a small clinic and organized like a junk drawer, and spent an hour setting it right, because order was the first language of safety, and she wanted the room itself to tell him somebody serious had arrived. At 4, he wheeled past the kitchen while she was labeling shelves and said, to the air rather than to her, "The agency people eat in their cars. There's a gas station in Navarre." "I brought my lunch," she said pleasantly, "but thank you for thinking of me." At 5, her phone buzzed. "Zeke. Aunt D. wee out of milk also. I maybe failed the algebra quiz, maybe." She stood in the vast stone kitchen of a man who could buy every dairy in the state and typed, "We'll fix both. Home by 8. Do the corrections tonight, not Sunday." Her sister Camille's face came to her, pixelated on a video call from a base she wasn't allowed to name, saying, "Take care of my baby D." And Dahlia had said what she always said, which was that Reece women didn't drop things. $20,000 was milk and algebra tutors, and the furnace in the Brooklyn Park duplex that was going to die some February and take its severance in one lump sum. She knew exactly what the envelope was. That was the insult of it. He hadn't offered her money. He'd offered her a mirror, and he was betting she'd like what she saw in it. At 7, coming back from the supply room with the inventory sheet, she took the wrong hallway and ended up passing the study, and the door was open a hand's width, and Emory Rutledge was on the phone in the dark with the lamp off and the lake black behind him. "Tell my brother the answer is still no," he was saying. His voice was different on the phone, quieter, tired in a way he clearly permitted no one to see. "He can send the papers to the moon for all I care. No, don't put Lowell on. I said what I said." She stepped back before the floor could give her away. It was in the medication room, closing out her first day, that she found the list. It was taped inside the cabinet door, where a person would see it every time they reached for his pills, which she understood immediately was the point. A single sheet of heavy paper, handwritten, the letters neat and engineered like the man himself. 9 names, 9 dates, 9 amounts, ascending, the way prices do when demand holds steady. Marisol V. 11 days, $8,000. Kenneth D. 4 days, $10,000. Priya S. 9 days, $12,000. Down and down, the amounts climbing, the days shrinking and shrinking again, until the last line. Gunnar H. 4 hours, $20,000. And beside it, in the same precise hand, the only editorial comment on the page, "Cried in the driveway." It was the saddest document she had ever read, and she had read charts that ended in the word "deceased," because that's what it was once you looked at it straight. Not a scoreboard, a proof. 9 names, 9 amounts, 9 people who had looked at a man at the bottom of his life and confirmed, for money, what he already believed about every living soul, including himself. He kept it where his medicine lived. He dosed himself with it daily. Dahlia stood in the little white room for a long minute, listening to the furnace breathe and the ice on the lake boom and shift somewhere out in the dark, a sound like a giant turning over in its sleep. Then she took the pen from her breast pocket, the good one, the one Camille had sent from deployment, with her initials on the clip, and beneath Gunner H and his 4 hours she wrote, in letters as neat as his, Dahlia Reece. Under the column of days, nothing yet. Under the column of amounts, she drew a line. One clean, horizontal stroke, the mark bookkeepers make when an account is closed. She taped the cabinet shut over it and gathered her coat and walked out through the enormous silent house, past the envelope still sitting fat and white on the table by the window, into the 12 below night. Behind her, in a doorway she didn't see, a man sat very still in the dark, watching her tail lights go down the long drive. Then he wheeled himself to the medication room, because he had heard the cabinet, and he read what the 10th nurse had written. Emory Rutledge sat in front of that open cabinet for a long time. It was the line that bothered him. Anyone could refuse a number. She had refused the column. Chapter 2. The War. The phone rang at 2:07 in the morning, 9 days into the job, and Dahlia knew before she answered that the war had started. "He's outside." The overnight aide's voice was young and coming apart. "He's on the terrace, and he won't come in. And he says if I touch the chair he'll have me charged with assault, and it's 15 below. And I called the agency, and they said call you." "How long has he been out there?" 10 minutes. 12. "Put a blanket over his lap whether he allows it or not. He can charge us both. I'm coming." Interstate 694 at that hour was a black ribbon between snowbanks, and she drove it with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, doing the math the whole way. Skin that couldn't feel cold. Blood vessels below the injury that wouldn't clamp down on command the way hers would. A body that would let the frost in without ever sounding an alarm. That was the obscenity of it. He could sit there, feeling almost nothing, while the cold did everything. She found him at the far edge of the flagstone terrace, facing the lake. The aide hovered at the door, useless with fright. The blanket had made it as far as his lap, which told her he'd allowed it, which told her something else besides. She didn't bring a coat for him. She brought a chair for herself, one of the iron ones stacked against the wall, set it down beside him with a clang, and sat. The cold was a living thing. It found her collar in the first 30 seconds. "Go inside," he said. "You first. I'm watching the lake. It's a good lake." Far out on the ice, one fish house window burned orange, some other insomniac keeping his own vigil. Their breath went up in columns. "Here's what your body is doing right now, since it won't tell you itself. Below your chest, your vessels are staying wide open when they should be closing ranks. You're dumping heat you can't feel leaving. Your skin is maybe 20 minutes from damage you won't notice for 2 days, and by then it's a wound, and wounds on you don't close the way they close on me. You know all this. You built a company on knowing this. Then you know I'm not confused. No. You're not confused. You're conducting an experiment. You want to know if I'll beg or grab the chair or cry in the driveway. And the answer is, I'll sit here and freeze next to you because I'm not allowed to leave you alone out here. And you're not cruel enough to keep a woman from Brooklyn Park out in 15 below to win a point. You're a lot of things, Mr. Rutledge. Cruel enough isn't one of them yet." The lake ice boomed, a long ripsaw crack rolling from shore to shore. He looked at her for a while. Frost had started in his stubble, silver on silver. "You should have brought a warmer coat," he said, and turned the chair toward the house. Inside she worked on him without ceremony. Warm blankets, warm fluids, skin checks by lamplight, her hands moving over the tops of his feet and his heels, hunting the pale, waxy patches that would mean trouble. Nothing. He'd cut it close and no closer, which she filed away too. Even his self-destruction was engineered to tolerance. The aide quit by text before sunrise. Dahlia signed on for extended coverage the same morning, and if the scheduler at the agency was surprised, she kept it out of her voice. The pills were next. She'd been carrying the count for days, letting it ripen. On the 11th morning, she set the medication cup in front of him at breakfast, and beside it she laid a sheet of paper ruled in her own columns, dates and tallies, the arithmetic of what the bottles held against what they should have held. "You're short 31 days of blood pressure medication across 3 refills," she said, "which means somebody in this house has been palming pills like a magician, and it isn't me, and the housekeeper doesn't strike me as the type. Maybe I dropped them 31 times. I have poor grip. You have a T4 injury. Your grip could crack walnuts." She sat down across from him, which the nurses before her had apparently never done, judging by the way it made him blink. "I'm not going to give you the lecture. You know what unmanaged pressure does to a man with your history better than most cardiologists. So I'll only say the part nobody has said out loud. If you're trying to die, this is a coward's way to do it. And I've watched you for 11 days, and cowardice doesn't fit you. It hangs on you like another man's coat." The silence went on long enough that she could hear the furnace 2 rooms away. "You have a strange bedside manner," he said at last. "I was an ICU nurse. Bedside was where people did their dying. You get honest or you get out." He looked at the cup. Then he took the pills, all of them, with a swallow of coffee, and set the cup down upside down like a man finishing a hand of cards. "Witnessed," he said. "Note it in the file." She noted it, and every morning after that, the cup became a ritual between them, him turning it over, her initialing the sheet, neither of them saying that a truce had a shape, and this was it. The crisis came on a Tuesday, out of an ordinary afternoon the way they do. She heard the glass break first. She came into the study and found him grey-faced and sheened with sweat from the hairline to the collarbone and bone-dry below it. That terrible border drawn straight across a man, his hand pressed to his temple as if to hold his skull together. "Headache," he managed. "Out of nowhere. Like a piston." She had the cuff on his arm inside 40 seconds, and what it told her sent her into the specific calm she kept in a back room of herself for exactly this. 210 over 130 and climbing, heart rate crawling low, his face flushed dark and blotchy above the injury line, pale beneath it, his body screaming in the only language left to it, autonomic dysreflexia. The chart had promised her this, and here it was, the ambush his own nervous system had been planning all along. Somewhere below the level where his brain could hear it, something had gone wrong, and his body was answering with a runaway pressure spike that could tear a vessel loose in his head while he sat in a warm room watching the light change on a frozen lake. "Stay upright. Don't let anyone lay you flat for this, ever." She was already moving, hands quick, loosening the waistband, checking the binder, tracing the catheter, tubing down its length until she found it, the kink. The line folded under the wheel of the chair like a garden hose stepped on, his bladder filling against a shut door, and his blood pressure ramming itself at the ceiling in protest. She freed the line. She watched him the way you watch a fuse. 2 minutes. 4. The flush began leaving his throat. The cuff came back down through the 180s, the 160s. His hand left his temple. 10 minutes later, he sat by the window with the color of a living man in his face, and she swept up the broken glass, and neither of them had raised their voice once through the whole of it. "Say it in English," he said. "What just tried to happen?" "A stroke. Tried is the correct word. Your body can't send pain up past the injury, so it sends pressure instead. A kinked line, a full bladder, a sore, a sock folded wrong, small things. On you, small things carry knives." She tipped the glass into the bin. "It's in your chart. 3 different nurses documented the risk. They read me numbers." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen him wear, and it took her a moment to name it. It sat so unnaturally on that face. Attention. You read me. She packed the cuff away and said nothing, because some compliments are load-bearing and you don't stand under them. It was that evening, both of them wrung out and pretending otherwise over soup. Neither had asked the housekeeper to heat, that he did the thing she had been waiting 11 days for him to do. He turned the interrogation around. Why did you leave the ICU at Hennepin? Her spoon stopped. Not long enough. Not yet, she said. Any other man would have pushed, and the man he'd been 2 weeks ago would have made a weapon of it. Instead, she watched him recognize the thing itself, a locked door inside another person, the exact make and model of his own. He nodded once, slowly, the way you nod to a countryman met far from home. At the door that night, coat on, keys out, she heard the chair behind her in the hall. Marisol lasted 11 days, he said. You've done 11. I'm not counting. She let herself out into the cold. Emory Rutledge sat in the dark hallway of his enormous house, listening to her engine turn over twice before it caught, and said it to nobody at all. I am. Chapter 3. 2 offers. Saturdays belonged to Brooklyn Park. The duplex off Zane Avenue was 60 years old and honest about it. The kitchen faucet had a personality. The furnace made a sound on startup like an old man getting out of a chair, but the light came in good and yellow over the table, where Zeke sat with his algebra corrections, writing slow and grieving audibly. This is because of the milk, he said. I take one quiz on an empty stomach, and the whole system fails me. The system, Dahlia said, setting a gallon on the counter. Watched you play 2 hours of NBA highlights the night before. Corrections, all of them. Show the work, or it doesn't count. You sound like Mom. Where do you think she learned it? The laptop chimed at 11, right on schedule, and there was Camille, pixelated and beautiful in a plywood room on a base she wasn't allowed to name. Zeke told her about the quiz with heavy edits. Camille looked at him the way she looked at him from 6,000 miles, like she was memorizing, and then Zeke drifted off to his room, and it was just the sisters. So, the billionaire. Camille grinned. Is he mean? He's hurt. Mean is just the uniform. The grin faded to something older. I know that voice, Dee. That's the voice from the ICU years. Do the job, take the check, come home. Don't carry him around in your chest. I don't do that anymore. You've never once not done that. The feed stuttered, froze her mid-love, unfroze her. Reece women don't drop things, fine, but some things you're allowed to set down. Kiss my baby, fix my sister's furnace. Monday brought the brother. Dahlia heard the car before she saw it, a black German thing that came up the plowed drive too fast for the ice, driven by a man who had never once slid off a road and assumed it was skill. Lowell Rutledge came through the front door on a gust of cold and cologne, 5 years younger than Emory, and smoother everywhere, the same face sanded of its weather, cashmere coat, a leather folder under his arm, the way other men carry flowers. You're the new one. He shook her hand warmly, held it a beat too long, read her name tag. Dahlia. He's eaten 9 of you, you know. You must be made of something. He's in the study, Mr. Rutledge. Lowell, please. There's only one Mr. Rutledge. Ask anyone. He said it with a smile, and underneath the smile was something that wasn't smiling at all. She did the medication count in the kitchen with the door open because she was a professional and also because she was human. The voices carried in edges. Lowell's was the astonishing one, warm as a heated seat, endlessly reasonable, the voice of a man describing a kindness. Words surfaced out of it like debris. Permanent medical leave, voting trust, dignity. Nobody would blame you. Let me carry it. Emory's voice came back low and flat, and only once loud enough to hear whole. The answer is still no. Lowell came out 4 minutes later, coat on, folder unopened, smile intact, in a way that told her the meeting had gone exactly as planned, which was badly, and that this was somehow part of it. He caught her at her car. She was scraping the windshield when he crossed the lot with his hands in his pockets. No coat now, letting the cold prove something about him. "Dahlia, a minute." He glanced at the Corolla like a man reading the mileage through the fender. "You've lasted longer than anyone." He's calmer. He took a meeting with his physical therapist. "I hear he's sleeping." He let that sit. "You're good for him. I'd like to make that sustainable. The family office can add a retention bonus to your arrangement. $2,000 a month, off the invoice, between us, for as long as it lasts." "For as long as what lasts?" The calm. Lowell's eyes went to the house. "Here's the thing nobody wants to say to him. My brother gets agitated when he engages with the company. His pressure spikes, his sleep goes. You've seen the chart. Any doctor would tell you the kindest care is a quiet life, restful, comfortable. If the conversation turns to Rutledge Medical, turn it somewhere else. That's all. You'd be doing good nursing and doing yourself a favor in the same motion." The scraper stopped on the glass. She thought about the furnace making its old man sound, about the gallon of milk and the algebra tutor Zeke's school kept recommending in the polite voice schools use for things they know you can't afford. $2,000 a month, off the books, for doing something that could be charted as clinically sound. "You're asking me to nurse your brother into a coma with the lights on," she said. Lowell's smile didn't move, but everything behind it did, a shift like ice settling. "I'm asking you to keep him comfortable." He was comfortable when I got here. He was comfortable and disappearing. She opened her car door. "I take my instructions from his care plan, Mr. Rutledge. It's the one document in that house your name isn't on." He stood there a moment. Then he laughed, softly, genuinely, which frightened her more than anger would have, and slipped his card under her wiper blade like a parking ticket. "For when the math changes," he said, "it always changes. Ask any of the 9. She drove home with the card in the cup holder, telling herself she'd throw it out at the first gas station, and didn't, and told herself she'd tell Emory in the morning, and didn't do that either. Twice that week she came to the edge of it, once at the medication cup, once in the long light of the afternoon when he was almost easy to talk to. Both times the sentence assembled itself, and both times she swallowed it, and she knew exactly why, even as she dressed it up as prudence. The family office paid the agency's invoices. Lowell's signature moved through her paychecks like a watermark. Say it out loud, make an accusation she couldn't prove against the brother who held the purse, and the 10th name on that vanished list might get an amount after all, and it would be zero, and it would be Zeke who paid it. That was the reason she showed herself. Underneath it sat the older one, the one Camille had named through 6,000 miles of static. Reece women carried things. Alone was just how she'd learned to lift. The card went into the glove box. It sat there like a seed. Thursday evening, Emory said, "Get your coat." She looked up from the charting. In 18 days, he had never once asked to leave the house. The garage held the van, a gleaming converted thing with the dealer plastic still on the second row, bought during the acute months by people who assumed he'd want the world back. He looked at it the way you look at a gift from someone who never knew you. "Not that," he said, "yours." So it was the Corolla. She held the transfer board and kept her hands where a spotter's hands belong, which is to say nearly useless and absolutely present, and let him do the work of it, the pivot and the slide and the 2 seconds where everything is arms. And when he was in the passenger seat, breathing hard, arranging his own legs with his own hands, he looked briefly, fiercely satisfied, and she pretended to check the mirrors. "It smells like a hockey bag," he said. "That's Zeke, my nephew. You get used to it." "I really don't think I will." He directed her east, onto the highway, through Minneapolis as the light died, and north along the river to Fridley, to a campus of long buildings off East River Road, with a sign she'd seen on the news, and on the side of boxes in hospital supply rooms, her whole career, Rutledge Medical. He had her park in the far corner of the visitor lot, engine running for the heat, and he sat looking at the third floor, where the windows still burned at nearly 9 at night. R&D, he said. The lights are a habit up there. I used to call down to security to get the names, so I'd know who to promote. He was quiet a while. 14 months. I assumed it would look smaller. Does it? It looks like the only thing I ever grew. They sat with that. Neither of them noticed the woman crossing the lot to her car, laptop bag on her shoulder, who slowed and looked twice at the passenger window of a salt-stained Corolla and stood very still in the cold for a moment before getting into her own car and picking up her phone. The post went up at 11:40 that night on the professional site where engineers live. Saw someone outside the Fridley building tonight I never thought I'd see again. Whatever the rumors say, the founder is still watching the lights. Some of us noticed. Some of us never stopped hoping. By Friday noon, it had 4,000 reactions, and a screenshot had reached a business columnist at the Star Tribune who called the company's press office asking a question nobody there was authorized to answer. Is he coming back? Lowell Rutledge read the post 3 times in his corner office, closed the laptop with the care of a man setting down a weapon, and pressed the intercom. The nurse's file, he said, and her weekly reports, all of them, tonight. He swiveled toward the window, toward the river, toward the third-floor lights burning across the campus, like a rumor he could not buy back. Who are you? He said, to the glass, to nobody. And what is my brother worth to you? Chapter 4. The Ice. It took her 9 days and 1 act of light fraud to get him back to Courage Kenny. The appointment went on his calendar as an equipment fitting, which was technically true in the way that a wedding is technically a catering event. He saw through it in the parking ramp at Abbott Northwestern, sitting in the passenger seat of the Corolla, reading the signage. An equipment fitting. Your cushion's due for pressure mapping, she said. The mapping happens to be in the therapy gym. The gym happens to contain therapists. I don't control the building. You're a con artist with a stethoscope. Transfer boards behind your seat. He had quit this place 14 months ago, 3 weeks into outpatient rehab, on a day nobody at the facility had forgotten, apparently, because the therapist who came across the gym floor greeted him with the weaponized cheer of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a rematch. What followed was an hour that dismantled him politely. Mat transfers, balance work that looked like nothing and left his shirt soaked. Wheelies over a strip of carpet meant to imitate every curb cut in Minnesota that the plows had buried. Halfway through, a kid rolled over to watch. 19 maybe, with a Grand Rapids hockey jacket, zipped over hospital-issue sweats, and a chair that had been customized within an inch of its life, frame stickered like a traveled suitcase, wheels canted like a race car. He had gone into the boards head first in a junior game in October C6, hands that were still learning to be hands again. He watched Emory struggle up a foam ramp with open interest. You're the med device guy, the kid said. Rutledge. My surgeon's got your company's hardware in like half his slideshow. He looked at Emory's chair, hospital stock, grey, unmodified, and his face went through genuine grief. And you're pushing rental rims. Man, that's like the Ford family taking the bus. Emory looked down at his own wheels for a moment. What's your 40 time in that thing, he said. Faster than yours, Grandpa. They raced the length of the gym. Emory lost by a lot, to a teenager with borrowed hands, and came back down the floor, breathing like a bellows and laughing, actually laughing. A sound Dahlia realized she had never once heard from him, and the whole gym pretended not to notice. because this was the one building in the Twin Cities where a billionaire learning to be a person again was nobody's news. He complained the entire drive home about the therapist, the foam ramp, the teenager, the parking ramp, the state of Minnesota, which she was learning was his love language. He went back Thursday. He went back the Thursday after that. The confession came the third week on the drive home, and she never knew what unlocked it. Maybe the snow. It had started over the western suburbs as they left the city, a fine, dry sift that made drivers into believers, and by the time they passed the Long Lake exit, the highway was wearing a thin white skin, and everyone had slowed to a crawl, except the people who hadn't. He watched a pickup slide half a lane and catch itself. "It was here," he said. "Give or take a mile?" She didn't answer. She checked her mirrors and kept her speed and let the silence hold the door open. November, freezing rain, not snow, the kind you can't see on asphalt. There'd been a board meeting that afternoon. His voice was level, tour guide flat, which is how people sound when they're carrying something down a staircase inside themselves very carefully. A buyer had come sniffing around the company that fall. One of the big strategics, enormous number. Lowell wanted to take it, and he'd done his homework. He had half the board pre-baked before I walked into the room. His whole case was that I'd built something worth more sold than kept. He kept using the word legacy, like it was a liquid you could pour from one bottle into another. The wipers kept their metronome. I said no. Then I kept talking. I told my brother in front of 11 directors that the company would outlive my interest in his opinion of it. I said other things too, the kind you can't get refunds on. His jaw worked. Then I got in the car angry, in weather I'd driven my whole life, and I drove it like the road owed me something. Past Long Lake, the rear end came out from under me. I remember being surprised. That's the humiliating part. 45 years in Minnesota, and I was surprised by ice. "How long were you down there?" 6 hours. The car had gone down the embankment nose first, and the bank hid it from the road. I couldn't reach my phone, and after a while I couldn't have worked it if I could. The cold does a strange thing at the end. It stops being cold. It gets almost polite. He looked out at the white fields going by. A county plow driver saw the gap in the guardrail cable on his second pass. Not his first, his second. He came down the bank on his backside, with a flashlight in his teeth. I think about that. Some men in warm rooms were deciding what I was worth an hour before, and the one who actually came for me drives a plow. The Long Lake water tower slid past behind the snow. Ingrid came every day, at Hennepin and then at Courage Kenny. Every day, then most days. Then she'd miss one and arrive the next with 2 days of cheerfulness prepared, like a lesson plan. He said it without acid, which was somehow worse. I watched her face do arithmetic for 7 months, visits against futures, the wedding we'd planned against the mornings I'd need. She wasn't cruel, Dahlia. Cruel would have been easier to hate. She just finished the calculation before I did. And one day she was a coat in a closet. The sage green parka. Dahlia kept her eyes on the road and finally understood why nobody in that house had ever moved it. You don't touch the evidence. You leave it hanging where the jury can see. The nurses started after that, and the envelopes. He turned and looked at her, and the tour guide flatness cracked. Just at the corner. Just enough. "You want to know the truth about the list in the cabinet?" It wasn't contempt. Every name that took the money was proof I hadn't lost anything real, because nothing real can be bought off. 9 names, 9 proofs. I was building a case that the world was exactly as empty as I needed it to be. And then I wrote my name on it. And then you drew that line. He faced forward again. "I've closed 100 deals. I can read a page. Everything on that list was an ending. Yours was the only entry that looked like an opening balance. Somewhere in there the highway lights had come on, and the snow made cones under every one of them, and it was a long moment before he frowned and looked at the dashboard clock, then at her, with something like alarm. "It's past 7. Your shift ended at 6. Why are you still driving?" "You were talking," she said. He stared at her. It was clear that no part of the machinery he used to understand people had a slot this fit into. 14 months of shifts and invoices and envelopes, and here was an hour that no one was billing. "Zeke has practice till 9 anyway," she added, because his face needed somewhere to put itself. "You're a tax write-off for me at this point. You're a terrible liar. You're a terrible patient. We're a matched set." She left him at the house with the evening aide, a solid retired Navy corpsman the agency had finally found, who Emory tolerated the way weather is tolerated. At the door, the strangest thing. He thanked her. Not for anything, just the word, standing alone, unarmored, sounding out of his mouth like a phrase from a language he'd studied in school and never once used in country. The next morning, she opened the medication cabinet and stopped. The list was gone. 4 small squares of tape remained at the corners, holding up nothing, a pale ghost frame around the absence, the outline of a thing that had hung there so long the paint had aged around it. 9 names, 9 amounts, 9 proofs, and 1 open account. Gone. She said nothing. She measured the morning pills into the cup and carried it to the breakfast table, and he took them all with his coffee and turned the cup upside down, witnessed ritual intact. But his eyes went to hers over the table, and he answered the question she hadn't asked. "I ran out of medicine," he said. Outside the wall of glass, the sun had come up hard over Lake Minnetonka, and the ice houses stood scattered on the white with their thin threads of smoke, and the light came into the room in a way that no longer felt like it was searching a crime scene. Dahlia set the cup in the sink. She thought of the dead conservatory off the south wing, the one room in the house she'd found locked. Its glass panes furred with dust, something in there that had been growing once and had been allowed to stop. "Good," she said. "Then we'll grow something instead." Chapter 5. The File. The furnace in Brooklyn Park chose the coldest week of March to die, which was the only kind of death a Minnesota furnace respected. The repair company could come Thursday. Thursday was 2 days and 18 below away, and the school had a half day, and Camille was 6,000 miles past helping, and Dahlia stood in Emory's kitchen at noon, working the problem out loud into her phone, until she noticed him in the doorway, listening without shame. "Bring him here," he said. "That's not how this works. The house is warm. It is, conservatively, enormous, and I'm told teenagers benefit from exposure to cautionary tales." He was already wheeling away, as if the matter had been decided at the board level. "There's a chess set in the study that hasn't been beaten in 14 months. Tell him the heat is free, but the education isn't." So at 3:30, Zeke came up the long drive with his backpack and his headphones and his 15-year-old face arranged in the expression of a young man determined to be unimpressed. And he held that expression through the gate, the grounds, the entry hall, the wall of glass, the frozen silver sweep of the lake, all of it, until he toured the whole silent first floor and delivered his verdict to its owner. "You got all this," Zeke said, "and 1 working floor." Dahlia closed her eyes. Emory made a sound she had heard only once before, in a therapy gym. They played chess at the study table, and it went how she should have known it would go. Zeke played like a shooting guard, all fast breaks and no defense, sacrificing structure for the highlight, and Emory took him apart 4 times in 90 minutes and narrated the autopsy with more delight than he'd shown any human being since she'd met him. "You keep grabbing material," Emory said, resetting the board. "Pawns, knights, anything shiny. Meanwhile, I'm taking squares. Watch, you have more pieces than me right now, count them." "So why are you losing?" Zeke counted, frowned. "Because your stuff's all connected." Because my stuff is all connected. Emory sat back. Position beats possession. A company is the same animal. The amateurs count what you have. The killers look at what your pieces can reach next move. My brother, and something crossed his face, there and gone, has spent his career counting material. Is he bad at chess? He's excellent at chess, Emory said. He thinks I'm the king. He's never noticed I'm the board. Zeke came back Thursday, even though the furnace was fixed. Nobody discussed it. There was a standing thermos of hot chocolate that appeared without acknowledgement, and homework happened at one end of the study table while ruin happened on the chessboard at the other, and Dahlia charted vitals in the kitchen and listened to the two of them argue about openings and told herself that the warmth spreading through that house was seasonal. It was the same week she found him with the letters. Late, past her shift, coming back for her forgotten phone, she saw the lamplight in the study and Emory at the desk with a grey archive box open in front of him, reading pages in a slanted feminine hand. He didn't cover them. That itself was new. "My mother," he said, "Marguerite. She grew up off West Broadway, North Side, 4 blocks that don't exist anymore. Married up, as they said then, and never once let my father's money finish the sentence of who she was." He turned a page with a care he showed no legal document. "Before she died, she asked me for one thing: housing on the Broadway corridor, real housing, the kind you can live a life in. I ran the numbers, and the numbers said no, and I let the numbers say it for me." He set the page down. "She wrote me this letter the same month. I filed it. I file things, Dahlia. It's what I did instead of feeling them. And now I've had 14 months to review the file." He closed the box, but his hand stayed on the lid. "There's a folder at the office with her name on it. A project I killed. I've been thinking about resurrection. Which is why, when the ruin arrived, it arrived into a house that had never been fuller and cut deeper for it. The letter came on legal stationery, addressed to Emory, copied to counsel. Dahlia brought in the mail and watched him read it, and watched 14 days of Thor reverse in about 11 seconds, the frost coming back down over his face like a grate. "An independent capacity evaluation," he said, "pursuant to Section 6 of the shareholder agreement. My brother has retained a physician to determine whether I remain fit to hold voting control." He read further, and stopped, and read the line again, and when he spoke next his voice had gone somewhere airless. "Supported by ongoing care documentation." He called the agency himself. She stood in the kitchen and heard the questions through the wall, spaced and precise. A deposition. Yes, the weekly care reports. Routed where? Since when? Authorized by whom? He hung up and sat in the hall with the answer, which was that every report, every vitals log, every note she had ever written, had gone each Friday to the Rutledge family office, per an authorization signed during his acute hospitalization, when his brother had held power of attorney, and never revoked, because no one had thought to look. 14 months of his blood pressure, his wounds, his refusals, his 2 a.m. terrace, filed weekly to Lowell like earnings reports. Then he called his brother, and that was the call that ended the winter. Dahlia only heard Emory's half, and Emory's half went quiet in the wrong way, the way a room goes quiet when a structural thing gives. Whatever Lowell said, it was short. Emory set the phone down on the hall table with exaggerated care, as if it were the phone that couldn't be trusted, and wheeled into the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "My brother suggests I ask you about January," he said. "About a conversation in my driveway. He says I should ask you what he offered since, and I'm quoting him now, even your nurse understands how this ends." The kitchen was very bright. She heard the refrigerator hum. "He offered me money," she said. $2,000 a month off the books to keep you comfortable. His word, comfortable, calm, away from the company. When? January, 3rd week. And you took it? No. Then why? And his voice stayed terribly level, which was how she knew. Am I hearing about it in March? From him? Every reason she had lined up in her chest and out loud, in that bright kitchen, she could hear how each one would sound before she said it. He controls the invoices. I couldn't prove the refusal. You were finally sleeping. I didn't want to hand you a war during a truce, all of them true. All of them, spoken now, indistinguishable from the sound a guilty person makes. Because I carry things, she said. It's what I do instead of feeling them. His own sentence handed back, and it didn't land as recognition. It landed as insolence. She watched him reach for the operating system that had run his life before her, the one that had never once returned a wrong answer until she'd drawn a line in a column, and she watched it boot up smooth and cold behind his eyes. Everyone has an amount. The saints just cost more. The proof was always pending. Here was the proof. The reports I can almost forgive, he said. You didn't build the pipe. But he sat in my driveway and put a number on you, and you decided I couldn't be trusted with that. You made yourself the sole shareholder of the truth in my own house. That's not carrying, Dahlia. That's control. I know it when I see it. I invented it. Emory, Mr. Rutledge. Quiet. Final. Your agency will be told the placement has ended. Take the week's pay. She stood there one more second, in the kitchen where the thermos still sat from Thursday. Hot chocolate for a boy who was going to ask her tonight why. And she picked up her bag, and at the door, his voice reached her one last time, and it was the worst thing he could have chosen, because it wasn't cruel. It was bewildered. There's no envelope, he said. I want you to understand that. Envelopes were for the ones who were only ever here for the money. 9 names, 9 amounts, and I knew exactly what each of them was, and it let me sleep. He looked at her across the whole cold length of his house. I don't know what you were here for. I have run it every way I know how, and I can't close the account. Do you understand what that does to a man who has been right about everyone his entire life? It should tell you something, she said. It tells me you were the most expensive one yet. She drove the 40 minutes to Brooklyn Park with the radio off. In the glove box, under the ice scraper and the insurance card, Lowell Rutledge's business card rode home with her in the dark, proof of exactly nothing, seed of all of it. Chapter 6. No proof. The agency was kind about it, which made it worse. Placements end, the scheduler said. Difficult client, everyone knew, 9 before you. There was a new assignment ready in Plymouth, a sweet post-surgical lady, lighter work, closer to home. Dahlia said yes to the interview and drove home and did not sleep. Zeke asked at breakfast why they weren't going to the lake house anymore. She gave him the version with no names in it. He stirred his cereal for a while. Did you get fired, he finally said, or did he get scared? She looked at her nephew, 15 years old, hair unbrushed, algebra unfinished, and understood that Camille's son had just outdiagnosed every adult in the story. Eat, she said. She lasted 4 days. On the 5th, she wrote the letter at the kitchen table, longhand, 1 draft, and drove out to Orono without calling ahead, because a call could be declined and a woman on the doorstep in daylight was a different math. The housekeeper let her in with an expression that said the house had been informed of her category change, and the house did not agree with it. He was in the study. The chessboard was still set up from the last Thursday, mid-game, Zeke's doomed queenside attack, frozen in place like Pompeii. He looked at her in the doorway, and she watched him decide not to have her removed, which from him was practically a welcome. I'm not here to be rehired, she said. I'm here so that what you believe about me is at least accurate. You can keep the verdict. I want the record right. He set down the letter he was pretending to read. The record. January 18th. Your brother waited at my car after his visit. He offered a retention bonus, $2,000 a month, off the invoice. His asks were that I keep you calm, keep you comfortable, and steer you away from anything to do with Rutledge Medical. He called it good nursing. I told him he was asking me to nurse you into a coma with the lights on. He laughed. And he put his card under my wiper, and he told me the math always changes. I kept the card. She crossed the room and set it on the desk in front of him. Cream stock, raised ink, Lowell Rutledge. There's your evidence. Look at it carefully, because here's what it proves. It proves he stood in your driveway. That's all. It proves the meeting, not the answer. There is no receipt for the money you don't take, Emory. I've thought about it for 5 days, and there is no document on this earth that shows a refusal, so I can't prove myself to you. Nobody could. That's the design of the thing, and your brother knew it when he lit the fuse, because he builds with your materials. He knew what a secret would do in a house that runs on proof. Then why keep it secret? The question came out of him rough. 5 weeks, Dahlia. The cup every morning. The gym. The car. My mother's letters. You had 5 weeks of chances. Because your brother's name moves through my paycheck like a watermark, and I've got a boy at my table eating on that paycheck. Because accusing a Rutledge with no proof is how a home care nurse becomes an unemployed one. She made herself keep going into the true part, the part with no cover. And because I have been carrying things alone since I was younger than Zeke, and somewhere in there I stopped noticing that telling someone is a thing you're allowed to do. My sister names it from a war zone. You bought 9 people and decided the whole species was for sale. I refuse help until refusing it burns the house down. You build proof that no one can be trusted. I build proof that no one is needed. She put the letter beside the card. We match, Emory. That's what this is. That's the whole catastrophe. 2 people who found the one person who fits their wound exactly, and here we are, wounding. The study was silent. Out the window, March was doing its grey penance over the lake, the ice gone rotten and dark in patches, the fish houses hauled off, the season between seasons. That's a resignation letter, he said finally. It's the truth with a signature on it. You can process it however you like. He picked it up. He read it the way he read everything, twice, completely. Then he did something she had never seen him do with a document in her presence, or imagined she would. He tore it in half. 11 days was the record, he said. You're at 51. I checked this morning. The halves went into the wastebasket. He looked up at her, and the operating system was nowhere behind his eyes, and what was there instead looked out at her with no protection at all. I sat in this room for 5 days, running you through every model I own, motive, incentive, pattern. Every model returns the same answer, and the answer is that I can't know. There's no diligence for this. There's no audit. He turned Lowell's card over in his fingers once and dropped it in the basket with the letter. So, I'm going to do the one thing I have never done with anything I couldn't verify. My brother thinks he knows how I'm built, and he's right about the machine. He's wrong about one thing. He said it plainly, like a figure read off a page. I believe you. No proof. I believe the woman who sat down next to me at 15 below. If I'm wrong, then I never understood anything about anyone, and honestly, given the last 14 months, that was already in play. Dahlia discovered she'd been holding her breath for approximately 5 days. That's the first unsecured loan of your life, she said, when she could. Don't ruin it with terminology. It was that same evening, neither of them willing to end the day, and neither willing to say so, that they finally opened the conservatory. The key lived in the desk, 3rd drawer, where keys to sacred things live. The door complained. Inside, the cold had been gentler than she'd expected, the glass room holding some ghost of shelter, and the dead garden stood in its pots exactly as it had been abandoned, stems gone to grey paper, tags still legible in a slanted feminine hand, Marguerite's hand, rosemary, geranium, overwinter. The roses, cut hard, tented in burlap, she must have wrapped the autumn she got her diagnosis, a gardener's bet on a spring she knew she might not see. She died in February, Emory said from the doorway. I locked it in March. It seemed obscene, things growing. He came in slowly, wheels quiet on the old brick floor, and stopped at a shelf of clay pots, small as teacups. She was out here every morning by 6. Board members would call the house, and my father would tell them the chairman's mother was unavailable. She was in a meeting. The meeting was tomatoes. His hand hovered over a hand-lettered tag without touching it. She asked for me at the end. I was in Zurich, closing something I could not tell you the name of today if you paid me. They worked for 3 hours. There was no plan and no discussion of one. Dahlia hauled pots and swept 10 years of grime off the potting bench, and Emory worked the bench itself, which sat, she realized slowly, at exactly the height of a man in a chair, and she watched him realize it too, mid-motion, hands full of soil. His mother had built her sanctuary low. Decades before the ice, for no reason she could have named, Emory Rutledge had made the one room in that vast house that fit the son who would need it. He didn't say anything about it. He worked with his sleeves rolled and dirt to his forearms. This man she had never seen touch anything but paper and chess pieces, crumbling old soil, checking the burlap on his mother's roses with a surgeon's care, and somewhere past 9 o'clock, over a flat of seed trays and an argument about whether anyone alive actually liked radishes, Emory Rutledge laughed until he had to stop and catch his breath, and the glass room held the sound the way it had been built to hold warmth. There, he said, at the end of it, of the bench, the trays, the labeled rows, the small, ridiculous hope of it. A project my brother can't file a motion against. She was beside him, close, both of them filthy, the lamp making one gold pool in all that dark glass. And he looked up at her with soil on his hands and none of his armor anywhere in the room, and everything went very still, and the distance between them shrank to the width of a decision. She could see him make it. She was making it herself, leaning in slow, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Headlights swept the drive. They broke apart like teenagers. The lights came on up the long approach, unhurried, sure of their welcome, and swung wide at the top of the circle, and Emory went stone still beside her, looking through the conservatory glass at the car easing to a stop before his door. "Emory, I know the car," he said quietly. "I knew it before I saw the driver. I bought it for her." Chapter 7. The Old Life. Ingrid stood in the entry hall holding her gloves in one hand, and the 14 months had been kind to her, which she seemed to know and to be faintly ashamed of. Dahlia had meant to leave. There was a decorous exit available out through the kitchen, and she was halfway to taking it when Emory said, "Stay in the house," not looking at her, in the voice he used for things that were not requests. And so she ended up in the kitchen with the door open, a chaperone nobody had asked for, listening to the past arrive in the front hall. "You look well," Ingrid said. "I look like a man who's been gardening. There's a difference." A pause. "You're wearing a ring." "In June. He's a surgeon, Rochester." She said it fast, unloading it, the way you set down something you've carried up a long stair. "Emory, I didn't come to—" "I know why you came." His voice wasn't cruel. That was the new thing in it, audible even through a wall. "Come sit. It turns out I've learned how." They talked for an hour in the room with the wall of glass, and Dahlia chatted in the kitchen and did not hear most of it and heard enough. Heard Ingrid's voice climb once and break on a sentence and come down the other side of it. Heard, in one of those silences that carry, the words she would keep thinking about for days. "I grieved you while you were still alive," Ingrid said. "That's the truth of what I did. I started grieving you in that hospital, and I'm so ashamed of this, Emory, but I couldn't stop once I'd started. You were right there and I mourned you like you weren't. And then one day the mourning was done, and I was done with it, and you were still alive, and I couldn't find my way back across." Whatever he said back was too low to carry. But there was no glass broken and no doors slammed, and when they came out to the hall, the two of them had the drained, rinsed look of people who have finally paid a bill that had been accruing interest for a year. At the closet, Ingrid stopped. The sage-green parka hung where it had hung for 10 months, and she looked at it and then at him, asking. "Take it," Emory said. "It's been standing trial in there long enough. Verdict's in. Time served." Ingrid laughed wetly and took her coat down off the hook, and it was in that exact moment, folding it over her arm, that she looked through the hall, through the far doors, into the lit conservatory, where the 10th nurse stood at the potting bench with rolled sleeves, watering seed trays that had come up green. Dahlia felt the look land. She raised a hand, neighbor to neighbor. Ingrid raised one back. "The garden's growing," Ingrid said to Emory very lightly. "It is. You never once came into that room the whole time I knew you." She was smiling. Her eyes were doing something else, some private inventory, and Dahlia watched her complete it. Watched a woman engaged to a good surgeon in Rochester stand in her past life's doorway and feel the specific indefensible sting of seeing it thrive. "Who is she?" "The first person since the ice," Emory said, "who talks to me like I'm still in the room." Ingrid nodded slowly. "That was always the hard part," she said. "For me." And she kissed his cheek and carried her coat out to the car he'd bought her and drove out of the property at a reasonable speed, like a woman with somewhere to be and no reason to look back, looking back twice. The gate closed behind her on 4 years of both their lives, and closed gently, which was its own kind of mercy. Dahlia stayed late. It wasn't discussed. There was transplanting to finish, was the theory. And the theory carried them to 9 o'clock, and then there was soup. That was the amended theory, and the theories ran out around 10 at the study table with the chessboard between them and neither one playing. "You heard most of that," he said. "I heard some of that." She apologized. 14 months I rehearsed that conversation. I had drafts. Some of them were very cruel and extremely satisfying. He turned a black pawn over in his fingers, and she sat there and told the truth before I could get any of them out, and I discovered I didn't want them anymore. I wanted her to drive off happy to Rochester. What is that? "Recovery," Dahlia said. "It's disorienting is what it is." He set the pawn down. "She asked who you were." "I heard what you told her." "I understated it." The room changed pressure. She had time to think that she should stand up, and time to notice she wasn't going to. And then he reached across the corner of the table and took her hand, soil still in the creases of both of theirs, and she leaned down as he came up, and they met in the middle of all of it, over a chessboard his brother could never read, and the kiss was slow and certain, and 14 months and 53 days in the making, and for the length of it there was no house, no lake, no ledger, no list, nothing anywhere that had ever been for sale. She broke it first. She sat back with her heart going like a sprinter and watched happiness arrive on his face. Actual happiness, undefended, and had to say the thing that was going to evict it, and hated the world for the arithmetic. "Emory, I'm your nurse. I'm aware of the staffing. I need you to hear the whole sentence." She kept his hand, deliberately, so the words couldn't be mistaken for a door closing. "You're my patient. Right now, tonight, on the active roster of my agency. You are a vulnerable adult client in my care, and I am a licensed professional, and there is a bright line in my profession around exactly this, and it exists for good reasons, and I am on the wrong side of it as of 90 seconds ago." She breathed. "I've been a nurse since I was 22. It's not what I do, Emory. It's the spine I have. If this comes to light while I'm assigned to you, it's not a scandal. It's my license. It's every year of my life on a table in a hearing room." He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him take it seriously, which almost undid her worse than the kiss. "Then we do it in the right order," he said. "The assignment ends properly, cleanly, formally, tomorrow morning, through the agency, with paperwork, and then time passes, whatever time is right, and then—" He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles once, like a man signing something. "Then I court you, Dahlia Reece, unemployed by me, at catastrophic length. That's the deal on the table. I'm told I'm a strong negotiator." "Tomorrow morning," she said. "The right order. The right order." He looked at the chessboard, at the frozen middle game. "What do we tell Zeke?" "That depends what happens after tomorrow. Tell him the chess continues under any administration. That part is not negotiable. The boy castle's too late and somebody responsible has to address it." He said it dry, and underneath the dryness was a 15-year-old at his study table on Thursdays, and they both heard it, and neither of them dared touch it out loud. She drove home at midnight down 694 with the windows cracked to the cold, feeling 17, feeling doomed, feeling the knuckles of her right hand, and she was still awake at 1 when Camille's face lit the laptop from 6,000 miles away and read her sister in 4 seconds flat. "Oh no," Camille said, delighted. "Oh, D, the billionaire." Across the metro, in a high, quiet condo in Wayzata, with the lake lying black below it, Ingrid's phone rang as she packed. Lowell Rutledge checked in every few months, the way he maintained all his instruments, and she took the call because she always had, and told him it had gone gently, that his brother seemed well, seemed changed, seemed... And here her voice went soft with something she'd have called generosity. Happy. Happier than she'd ever, in 4 years, been able to... She heard herself. She stopped, mid-sentence, hating the shape of what she'd just handed across the line and unsure exactly which part of it was the blade. "Happy how?" Lowell said pleasantly. "With the nurse?" Ingrid did not answer that. It didn't matter. Lowell Rutledge sat in his office long after the call ended, in the dark, with the file his assistant had built in March open on the desk. A career of caring too much, a written warning in the record, years old, boundary concerns, some patient's funeral. A pattern, if a person needed one. People generally didn't understand what he did for this family. There was no version of this where he was the villain. He was the only one doing the accounting. The complaint went in anonymously online before he went home. 1 copy to the home care agency, 1 to the Minnesota Board of Nursing. Monday, 7:40 a.m., Dahlia's phone rang while she packed Zeke's lunch, and it was her supervisor, and the voice was wrong from the first syllable. "Don't go to the site," her supervisor said. "Come to the office, now, and Dahlia, don't talk to anyone on the way in." Chapter 8. Everything breaks. The conference room at the agency had a box of tissues on the table, positioned in advance, and that was how Dahlia knew the size of it before anyone spoke. Her supervisor did the talking. A compliance officer sat in and did the watching. The complaint had come in anonymously over the weekend, and the sentence they read aloud had been drafted by someone who knew exactly which words were made of concrete. Romantic involvement with a vulnerable adult client. Effective immediately, she was removed from the Rutledge placement and suspended from the field pending investigation. A parallel copy had gone to the Minnesota Board of Nursing, which meant the matter had left everyone's hands and now lived where her whole life could be put on a table and weighed. "There's history in your file," the compliance officer said, not unkindly, which was the worst way he could have said it. "A written warning. Boundary concerns. That was a funeral, I know. It reads differently now. Everything in a file reads differently once somebody alleges a pattern." She gave them the truth because it was all she had brought. The placement, the months, the kiss, singular, 2 nights ago, and the plan already made to end the assignment in the right order. She watched them believe her personally and note it professionally. 2 different transactions, and understood that the second was the only one that would survive on paper. In the parking lot, she sat in the Corolla with her hands at 10 and 2, going nowhere. She did not cry. She ran numbers. Suspension was unpaid. The furnace repair was on the credit card. Camille's allotment covered Zeke's half of things, and not $1 of hers. And underneath the arithmetic, in the place the arithmetic was built to pave over, 1 sentence on a loop: "They are going to take the spine out of me, and I handed them the knife myself over a chessboard at 10 o'clock at night." Emory called at noon. He already knew. His voice had the flat, accelerated calm of a man in a war room, and he laid the counterattack out like a term sheet. His attorneys had the complaint. A defamation posture was viable. Crisis communications were retained by 2 o'clock, and the agency itself, he said, had been shopped twice in 5 years. Thin margins, an owner near retirement. "I can buy the agency by Friday," he said. "The suspension gets rescinded by lunch." Emory. It's clean, it's fast, it ends this. Stop. She said it quietly, and something in the quiet reached him, because the term sheet stopped. Listen to me now, because this is the most important thing I will ever ask of you. You cannot buy my name back, do you understand? My name is the one thing in this that has to come back to me the same way it left, or it never comes back at all. If your money touches this anywhere, then every person who ever hears the story hears that a billionaire made it go away, and they'll be right, and I will spend the rest of my career as the nurse whose file got fixed. You'd win the fight, and I'd lose the spine. Her voice held, barely. You told me once the only thing you learned in that chair is that everybody has an amount. Here's mine. I will lose the license telling the truth before I keep it any other way. This is the one thing you don't get to carry for me. The line was silent a long time. Then what am I allowed to do? He said finally, and he sounded, for the first time since she'd known him, entirely without resources. Nothing, she said, loudly. He did one thing anyway, and it wasn't money. The medical transport van came for him at 3, a rattling contract vehicle with a hydraulic lift, and he rode it 40 minutes to Fridley and came up to the executive floor of his own company unannounced, past faces that would talk about it for years, into his brother's corner office and closed the door. Lowell stood at the window. 90 seconds of warning from the lobby had been enough to compose himself into perfect reasonableness. He did not pretend, which was the one respect his brother still paid him. You filed it, Emory said. I reported a concern. There's a difference in law. There's no difference in this room. A caregiver with a documented history of boundary violations entered a romance with my brain-injured brother, who controls 52% of a company employing 4,000 people. Lowell said it evenly, almost gently. Say it out loud yourself, and tell me it isn't reportable. I'm not brain-injured, Lowell. My spine is broken. You've had 14 months to learn the difference, and you've declined because your whole project needs me to be diminished, and I keep failing to diminish. Emory rolled forward, one length. The evaluation, the reports routed to your office, the offer in my driveway, and now her license, not me, Lowell, her. You couldn't reach me, so you aimed at a home care nurse from Brooklyn Park with a kid at her table. Look at what you're holding. Look at what the last 14 months made of you. And there, for one unguarded second, something surfaced in his brother's face. Something that had been down deep since a November night, before it was pulled back under. Somebody had to do the accounting, Lowell said. You were gone. I watched them cut you out of that car, and then I watched you send away every human being who came near you for a year. And I did the books, Emory, the way you taught me. I wrote you off. It was the only honest entry. And when I came back on the balance sheet, Lowell didn't answer. That's the whole file, isn't it? Emory said softly, the anger draining into something colder and sadder and more dangerous than rage. Not the company, the correction. You can't book the entry that says you were wrong. He turned the chair toward the door. I came here to ruin you. I want you to know that. I sat in that van with 40 minutes and a list. And I'm not going to, because destroying you proves your arithmetic, and I'm done keeping your books. He paused at the threshold. You'll hear from me when I know what forgiveness costs. I warn you now, Lowell. I price things accurately. It's the one thing everyone agrees on. The board interview was set for Thursday, at the offices on University Avenue, and the night before it, her phone rang at 9. They had not spoken in 4 days by her rule, on the advice of a lawyer she couldn't afford and hired anyway. I know I'm not supposed to call, Emory said. Don't tell me anything about tomorrow. I called to tell you nothing loudly. A breath. How's Zeke? Scared. He won't say it. He's playing a lot of chess online. She was at the kitchen table with the file boxes, every year of her career in photocopies. Emory, you asked me once why I left the ICU, and I said not yet. Her hand went flat on the table, steadying against it. It's yet. He waited. She was 19. Car crash on 94, black ice, the winter before I left. She heard him go very still at the word ice and kept going. 5 weeks she was mine. Nights, ICU 1-to-1. Her mother worked doubles and couldn't always be there, so I was. I read to her. You're not supposed to pick one, Emory. Every nurse knows you're not supposed to pick one. She died on my shift. Not from anything anyone did wrong. She just left at 4 a.m. with my hand on her. And I went to the funeral because her mother asked me, and I stood in that church like family, and the hospital wrote me up for it. Boundary concerns. That's the pattern in my file. That's the history they'll read tomorrow. Her voice finally bent. I couldn't go back into that unit. I chose home care because it was smaller. 1 patient, 1 door. I thought I could care right-sized, and then the 10th door had you behind it. Dahlia. He said her name like a hand on a shoulder. Tomorrow, when they open the file, tell them exactly that. All of it, word for word. It's not a defense. No, he said. It's a spine. I've seen it hold up worse weather than a hearing room. She told the board everything. The investigator was a tired, precise woman who had heard every version of every story, and Dahlia gave her the one version that never gets told. The whole of it, the terrace and the cup and the kiss, dated, unshaded. You can write that down word for word, she said, and the investigator looked up at her once, unreadable, and did. She walked out into the April afternoon, not knowing if she was still a nurse, and drove home and made Zeke's dinner. At 5 the next morning, in the enormous empty house in Orono, Emory Rutledge positioned his chair beside his bed in the dark and transferred without the board, and fell and lay on the floor of his bedroom breathing and got himself up, 11 minutes, and did it again, and fell again, and got up faster, and did it again, and did not fall. At 8, he called Courage Kenny and asked for the Transitional Rehabilitation Program, residential, the one that taught a person to live alone, not to walk, to need no one he didn't choose. He packed 1 bag. At the gate he stopped the car and looked back once at the house on the lake, the conservatory glowing green at its south end like a banked fire, and then the gate closed in the mirror, and he was gone from that house for the first time in 14 months, with no one paid to accompany him. Chapter 9. The Price of Forgiveness. The transitional program gave him a room with a bed, a kitchenette, and no staff he could summon, which was the entire curriculum. There were 6 of them on the floor that spring. A retired union electrician relearning buttons after a stroke. A farm kid from Wilmar, newer to his injury than Emory, and better at it, which was its own daily instruction. Nobody on the floor knew what he was worth or cared, because the floor ran on a different currency entirely, and the exchange rate humbled him weekly. Could you cook it? Could you carry it? Could you get yourself up off a wet bathroom floor with nobody coming? And he learned that one the hard way on a Tuesday in May, lying on the tile for 20 minutes with his heart hammering, working the problem like his mother's son. And when he finally levered himself up through sheer geometry and rage, the farm kid's voice came through the wall, laconic as weather. Took you long enough. I fell gracefully. You fell like a filing cabinet. Dinner's at 6. You're cooking. He cooked. Badly at first, in a kitchen where everything lived at the wrong height, until he rearranged his thinking instead of the shelves, and then one evening in June he put a roast chicken on the common room table that nobody had to be polite about, and the electrician ate 3 helpings and said it was the best thing about his stroke so far, and Emory Rutledge, who had been served by professionals on 4 continents, sat at a laminate table among strangers and felt something he had no ledger category for. He checked the impulse to buy the program a new kitchen. He was learning. The gift they were giving him was that nothing here could be purchased, and he would not insult it with a check. He learned the hand controls in a parking lot in June, in a grey sedan with an instructor named nothing he'd remember, stalling and lurching, and finally, on the 4th session, Actually driving, a machine responding to his own hands on an open road with the windows down, and he had closed 9-figure deals with less feeling in his chest. Every Friday he wrote to Zeke. It was postcards mostly, the wide-format kind from the gift shop at Abbott Northwestern, and the correspondence was conducted with the gravity of a title match. Knight takes F5. You castled late again. We have discussed this. A week later, Brooklyn Park would answer in pencil, the notation improving month over month, and once, under the move, in the careful script of a boy pretending not to ask, Aunt Dee doesn't laugh as much. Are you coming back or what? Emory sat with that card a long time. His reply held the rules he'd set himself like a rail. Bishop to E7. Some things have to be done in the right order. Tell her nothing. This is between men. ER, the right order. Her phrase, running his life now. He met his brother in July at the office, and this time he drove himself there and parked in the space with his name on it, which had never once held a car he was driving. Lowell was already in the boardroom, 14 months of maneuvering, and what it came down to was 2 brothers and a long table built for 20. You said you'd name a price, Lowell said, for forgiveness. I did. Here it is. Emory laid 1 page on the table and slid it across. You give the Board of Nursing a signed statement, full authorship of the complaint, your motive, in your own words, a retraction of the word pattern, specifically, in writing because that word was the knife and you forged it. My lawyers don't draft it. You do. Every sentence in your own hand, with your name under it, filed publicly enough that anyone who ever searches her name finds your confession standing next to it. Lowell read the page. His jaw moved. This exposes me to consequences. Yes, that's what it costs. Emory folded his hands. Now here's what I pay. The same day your statement is filed, the company announces you as Chief Executive Officer of Rutledge Medical. The boardroom went so quiet the river was almost audible. I keep the chair. I keep my shares, all of them, and the housing division reports to me directly. But operations, the whole engine, 4,000 people, yours, earned incidentally. You ran it for 14 months and ran it well, which I'd have told you sooner if you hadn't been trying to have me declared incompetent at the time. He watched his brother's face fight itself. You spent 2 years trying to take this from me, Lowell, and the tragedy is you never needed to. You needed to ask. Nobody in our family ever learned to ask. Mother asked me for one thing in her whole life, and I ran the numbers on it. So, there's the trade, your confession for your ambition, the truth about her name, at the price of yours. Why? Lowell said finally, and it came out cracked, the reasonableness gone at last. Would you hand it to me after everything I did? Because destroying you proves your book's balance. Because Mother had 2 sons, and I've read her letters now, all of them, and she never once wrote as if she had one. Emory turned the chair toward the door. And because forgiveness that costs nothing is just amnesia. This one costs us both. That's how you know it's real. Sign or don't. The price doesn't change. Lowell signed. It took him 9 days and, Emory suspected, several drafts that told the truth less than the final one did. But the statement that reached the Minnesota Board of Nursing in August was signed, complete, and ruinously honest. And it did exactly what confessions do. It ended one thing and began another. The board's letter reached Brooklyn Park on a Thursday. Dahlia read it standing at the mailbox because some envelopes cannot survive the walk to a kitchen table. The investigation into her conduct was closed. No disciplinary action. The letter noted, in the bloodless prose of such letters, her voluntary self-report, her truthful and complete cooperation, the termination of the professional relationship prior to any continuation of personal involvement, and the complainant's sworn retraction of the characterization of a pattern. Her license stood exactly as it had stood, unfixed, unbought, hers. She cried at the mailbox, one hand on the lid, in front of the whole indifferent street. And then she went inside and made dinner, because that is what a spine does with good news too. The job she found herself, in September, walking back through the doors of Hennepin Healthcare for the first time in years, was on the rehabilitation floor. Not the ICU. She'd looked at the ICU posting for a long time and known the difference between healed and finished. Rehab was where people learned to live inside what had happened to them, and she had, it turned out, recent field experience. Camille came home in July. Terminal 1 at MSP, the escalators from the secure side, and Zeke broke from Dahlia's hand at first sight of the uniform and took the last 30 feet at a run, 15 years old, and past caring who saw, and Camille dropped her bag and took the hit like she'd braced for it across an ocean. Over her son's shoulder, her eyes found her sister, and later, at the kitchen table with the good yellow light coming in, she took inventory of Dahlia the way she took inventory of everything. "You set it down," Camille said. "The thing, I can see it. You finally set something down." "I had help. The billionaire." It wasn't a question. Camille studied her. "Where is he?" "Doing something in the right order," Dahlia said, and taking his time about it, and found that she trusted the silence, which was itself the strangest development of the entire year, because it had been silence. 2 months of it, then 3. No calls, no flowers, no letters with his name. She knew pieces from the world's own noise, the announcement in the business pages, Emory Rutledge named CEO, founder to chair board and lead new housing division, and a photograph of Emory she'd studied longer than she'd admit, at some podium, thinner, sharper, entirely alive. She did not call. Once in August, she drove as far as the ramp onto 694 West before she took the next exit and came home, and sat in the driveway laughing at herself, 36 years old with her keys in her lap, like a teenager outside a dance. He had let her fight for her name without his money, though it must have cost him everything he was to stand aside. She could let him do whatever this was without her hurrying it. That was the deal neither of them had spoken aloud. It held. The envelope came the 3rd week of September. Heavy paper, cream, the weight of it familiar in her hand before she understood why. And then she did understand, and had to sit down on the front step. It was the same stock as a page that had hung inside a medicine cabinet with 9 names on it. He'd had it made from the same paper. Of course he had. He priced things accurately. Inside, a printed invitation. The honor of her presence. Groundbreaking ceremony, the Marguerite, West Broadway Avenue, Minneapolis, Saturday, 10 a.m. And below the print, in that neat engineered hand, she'd have known anywhere, 7 words and a signature. The column is still open. Come see. Chapter 10. The Marguerite September did what September does to Minneapolis, which is apologize for the whole year in gold. The lot on West Broadway had a tent, a stage riser with a ramp instead of stairs, a row of chrome shovels stuck in a berm of clean dirt, and more neighborhood than dignitaries, which Dahlia understood within minutes, was by design. Folding chairs full of church hats and work jackets, a drum line from the high school, city people in good suits being made to wait their turn behind a 90-year-old woman from Emerson Avenue who remembered Marguerite's mother and intended to say so at length. Dahlia stood at the back, in the good dress that wasn't too good, and watched Emory Rutledge come up the ramp under his own power, in a chair she didn't recognize, a lean titanium thing built like the hockey kids, and take the microphone in front of 400 people and say nothing about himself at all. He talked for 6 minutes about his mother, about 4 blocks that didn't exist anymore, and the woman they'd made. About a request he had received years ago and declined by spreadsheet, and how a man can be given one instruction his whole life and take 14 months on his back to hear it. 96 units, he said. Every one of them built so that no life would have to ask the building's permission. He never said the word wheelchair, and he never said the word billionaire. And when he finished, he did not wait at the center of anything. He came down the ramp while the drumline played and let the 90-year-old woman from Emerson Avenue hold his hand and tell him things. and Dahlia watched him listen with his whole face and stayed where she was because the invitation had said, "Come see," and she was seeing. She saw Lowell, too, at the edge of the tent, in a suit that didn't ask for anything, standing the whole hour and clapping in the right places and approaching no one. Their eyes met once across the crowd. He nodded to her, a single careful inch, a man acknowledging a debt in a currency he was still learning, and she nodded back the same inch, and that was all, and it was enough. Some accounts stay open, some just stop accruing. The crowd thinned the way September crowds do, toward parking and lunch. She was deciding between the two herself when Zeke appeared at her elbow, blazer over his church shirt, entirely too pleased about something. "You're supposed to come to the model unit," he said. "Since when do you know what a model unit is?" "Since I got a postcard Tuesday. Bishop takes Rook, by the way. He's not going to see it till it's too late." He was steering her by the arm, 15 years old and conducting. "Aunt D, walk faster." The model unit stood at the far corner of the site. First thing finished, the way builders do it. One true apartment, so people could believe in the drawings. New key, new lockbox, door standing open on September light. Zeke delivered her to the threshold and then performed the most suspicious act of his entire life, which was leaving voluntarily. She went in alone. It was one bedroom and a kitchen and a world. She saw it the way a nurse sees a room, fast, complete, and it kept answering before she could ask. Counters at 2 heights, run in one seam like it had always been the only way to build a counter, a sink you could sit under, doorways a chair could pass through with both hands full, an oven mounted where no one would ever have to fight it, a closet rod that lowered on a touch, a bathroom that had clearly been designed by someone who had lain on a floor for 20 minutes once and never intended to arrange that for another human being again. Not equipment, architecture. The whole apartment said the same sentence everywhere she looked. A life happens here, and it asks no one's pardon. On the kitchen counter, in a plain glass jar of water, stood one rose. It was not a florist's rose. It leaned. One petal had a torn hem. It was the kind of rose that had survived something, root and graft, burlap and winter, 10 locked years and 1 long spring, and she was still looking at it when the wheels sounded on the new floor behind her. "First bloom off her stalk," Emory said. "It opened Thursday. I've been guarding it from the site crew with my whole reputation." He looked the way the photograph had looked, only alive. Thinner, weathered, sleeves rolled. He came to a stop a body's length away, close enough that she could see everything the silence of 4 months had built, and far enough that it was still a question. "You drove here," she said. "Hand controls. I passed my road test in June. The examiner said I merged like a funeral director, which I've chosen to hear as praise." His eyes hadn't left her. "You look like the letter came." "It came. Closed. No action." Her voice did something on the words. They read his statement into the record, Emory. Every sentence. "I know. I priced it." He said it without triumph. An accountant closing a year. "And then I stayed away 4 more months. And I owe you the arithmetic on that, so here it is, all of it." He took a breath, like a man stepping off a dock. "I didn't build any of this to stop needing you, Dahlia. I built it so the asking would be clean. 14 months. Everyone who came through my door was paid to be there or paid to leave, and you were on somebody's clock the first time I ever saw you, and I would not, ask you the most important question of my life while there was one invoice anywhere in the room. So I learned to cook, I learned to fall, I learned to drive, and file confessions, and grow my mother's roses, and now there is no job here, there's no patient here. There's just a man who can get himself up off any floor in Minnesota asking a woman a question on his own to—" He stopped, and the smile broke through, crooked, on his own 4 wheels. His hand came off the rim of the chair, and it held a ring. He held it low and steady, at his own height. No reaching up, no apology for the geometry, and she understood that this too was built, that he was asking from exactly where he lived and no higher, and that the last distance was hers, to close the way it had been hers since a January morning with an envelope on a table. Dahlia Reece, you wrote your name at the bottom of the worst document I ever created, and you refused the column, and I have been trying to close that account for 8 months, and I finally worked out that it doesn't close, it compounds. The engineered voice bent, and he let it. Marry me. I can't offer you a dance at the wedding, but I've been advised by a 19-year-old in Grand Rapids that I underestimate my own chair, so I'll offer you this instead. Marry me, and every year on this date I'll bring you the first rose out of that greenhouse, and we will live a life that asks no one's pardon. She came down to him the way she had at 15 below, at eye level, where they had done all their best work, and took his face in both her hands. Yes, she said. Witnessed, noted in the file. The sound he made was half laugh and all surrender, and she kissed him in the September light, with the whole future standing around them smelling of sawdust and cut dirt. And outside somewhere Zeke whooped, subtle as a drumline, having obviously never left at all. Then Emory took her hands and set them in his, palm to palm, and pushed one slow turn with the rims, and she followed, and they danced. There is no other word for it. Small circles on a new floor, her steps and his wheels finding a shared time signature nobody had written down, the rose standing watch on the counter, the light coming gold through windows his mother's name had paid for, around and around in the first home of the rest of it. 9 people had been paid to leave that house on the lake. The 10th was never for sale,